The Enchanted Mind's Canvas. Ella carefully added the finishing touches to her painting, layering vibrant strokes of green amid the earthy browns and faded tans of fall. The scene was one she had sketched in the park days ago, a quiet landscape draped in the remnants of late autumn, the air crisp with the bite of encroaching winter. As her brush danced across the canvas, her mind drifted to the frozen pond she had sat across from, its surface resembling a sheet of shattered glass reflecting the pale autumn sky. Then something shifted. A sudden eerie chill prickled her skin, creeping over her arms despite the warmth of her studio. The faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled her nose, so vivid it nearly overwhelmed her senses. A sharp gust of wind brushed past her cheek, biting at the tip of her nose. She gasped. Her fingers trembled around the brush as the sensation deepened, no longer just a figment of her imagination. It felt real. The world around her wavered, its edges blurring as if reality itself had begun to ripple beneath her fingertips. Ella's heart raced. Her hand wasn't just gliding over the painting, it was sinking into it. Her studio began to shift, the walls dissolving into streaks of color, and then, in an instant, she was there. The park looked exactly as she had painted it. Frost-laced grass, undressed trees swaying, and a frozen pond glistening under the pale sunlight. The icy air sent a chill up her spine as the wind whispered through brittle branches. Her heart pounded. How am I here? Before she could take a step forward, the sensation snapped, sharp and sudden, like a rubber band stretched to its limit. The world around her rushed past in a dizzying blur, and in the blink of an eye, she was yanked back to her studio. Ella glanced around, her breath unsteady as she tried to ground herself. Her gaze settled back on her painting, looming more vibrant, more lifelike, almost as if it had absorbed some essence of reality itself. Her eyes then fell to the floor. Scattered across the hardwood were remnants of dead grass and brittle leaves, the very same ones that had lined the park's frozen ground. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Then, like a whisper from the past, a memory surfaced, one she had long convinced herself was nothing more than a dream. This had happened before. A few months after waking from her coma, she had felt the same eerie pull, like an inexplicable shift between worlds. But she had dismissed it, blaming it on the lingering haze of recovery, a mere figment of her imagination. But it wasn't just her imagination, was it? She had seen it happen, and more. It started subtly. Cats stretching, birds ruffling their feathers, shifting within the canvas. With each incident, her paintings became eerily lifelike, earning her recognition and eventually her own gallery exhibition. But this was different. This time, she hadn't just brought something to life. She had been pulled into it. A shiver ran down her spine. The cold from that autumn landscape still clinging to her bones. She turned back to the painting, a strange weight settling in her chest. Whatever was happening to her, it wasn't just art anymore. It was something deeper, something more powerful, and she had no idea how to control it. 5 years ago. Anxious and impatient, Ella paced the hospital, her walker tracing an endless figure 8 of corridors. She wanted out. She was bored, exhausted, and angry, tired of the constant checkups, the intrusive monitoring, the way doctors spoke about her as if she weren't in the room. Most of all, she was tired of feeling like the world had moved on without her. Her classmates had graduated, their social media filled with college acceptance letters, beach trips, and late-night adventures. Meanwhile, she was stuck here, relearning how to walk, how to hold a fork without her hands trembling, how to exist in a life that had been paused for a little over 6 months. For half a year, Elizabeth Ella Larson had been lost in a silent void, trapped in a coma she had no memory of falling into. One moment, she was on the bus ride home from a school field trip, laughing with her friends. The next, darkness. Her class's bus narrowly avoided a catastrophic collision with a tractor trailer. The truck driver, having fallen asleep at the wheel, veered into the bus's lane, forcing the driver to make a desperate maneuver to prevent disaster. While most students escaped with minor injuries, the incident took a more serious toll on a few. Tragically, the bus driver suffered a heart attack at the scene, and 2 students sustained severe head injuries, slipping into comas, Ella being one of them. When Ella woke, the piercing brightness of hospital lights and the rhythmic beeping of monitors shattered the stillness, as if time had paused. But the world hadn't waited for her. Her face was already all over social media, her story shared and reshared by curious classmates. Though her parents and hospital staff tried to shield her from the media, it was inevitable. Visiting friends posted selfies and status updates, ensuring her return wasn't just her own. Initially, the attention was overwhelming. Luckily, to Ella's relief, the novelty eventually faded. Only a few persistent reporters and social media diehards still sought a glimpse of the girl who emerged from a coma. Meanwhile, life resumed for everyone else, leaving Ella to realize she hadn't just lost 6 months. She had lost so much more. Pep rallies, graduation, and spring break. Before the accident, Ella had been an exceptional artist for her age. She had spent years perfecting her craft, creating paintings so lifelike They seemed to breathe on the canvas. Art was her passion, her escape, and hopefully her future. She had applied to countless schools, dreaming of the day she would walk through the doors of an art academy. But the more she recovered, the more she sensed that something had changed. A strange energy pulsed through her hands, as if the accident had left behind more than just scars. At first, she had brushed the feeling off as nothing more than a lingering effect of her recovery. However, when she finally picked up a pencil again, her art would begin to capture more than just reality. Hoping to lift her spirits, her parents brought her sketchbook. The physical therapist agreed and encouraged her to draw, believing it might restore her fine motor skills quickly. But the first time she tried sketching, her fingers, once so steady, betrayed her. The once effortless strokes turned to jagged, clumsy lines, chicken scratch from a toddler's hand. Frustrated and disheartened, she shoved the sketchbook aside and refused to touch it for days. Then, one afternoon, on impulse, she picked it up again. She began sketching the vase of flowers that sat on her hospital windowsill, a gift from her art teacher. The sunlight caught the delicate curve of a lily petal just right, making it the perfect subject to draw. As she sketched the details, a strange warmth spread through her fingertips. As Ella became completely immersed in her sketch, her mind wholly focused, the air around her began to shift. The scent of fresh lilies began to overwhelm her senses, far more intense than before. Startled, she looked up. Her breath caught. The real flowers had changed. The lilies that were half closed were now in full bloom, mirroring the one she had just finished drawing. Her sketchbook slipped from her hands, landing with a soft thud on the hospital bed. Ella stared at her fingers, watching as dust particles swirled in the afternoon light. Except they weren't just dust. The air around her shimmered, an iridescent glow clinging to her skin. She blinked, her heart pounding. It had to be a hallucination, a trick of her recovering mind, just a dream, she told herself, while her eyes were still fixated on her hands. Yet deep down, she knew the truth. Something within her had been unlocked. Awakened by the sun's warmth, Ella sat up, squinting against the bright light streaming through her bedroom window. Despite the winter chill, the morning sun cast an ironic touch of warmth to the frigid 30-degree day. As she shook off the haze of sleep, the sharp beeping of her alarm clock jolted her fully awake, a nagging reminder of the day ahead. She was scheduled to inspect the gallery rooms in the newly opened art building downtown, ensuring her pieces were displayed exactly as she envisioned. Tomorrow marked her debut exhibition, the moment she had worked toward for years. Excitement and nerves twisted in her chest. It was finally here, and she wasn't about to leave anything to chance. Silencing the alarm, Ella swung her legs over the bed and took a steadying breath. She grabbed the outfit she had picked out the day before, sophisticated yet artistic, the perfect balance. Heading towards the bathroom, she caught a glimpse of her latest work, leaning against the wall. A hypnotic twilight scene of Pittsburgh's skyline, reflected in the Monongahela River. The river seemed to shimmer, as if a ripple might break across the surface if she stared too long. Nope. Nope. Not today, she muttered, quickly looking away. No incident, especially not tomorrow. But what if it happened again? What if a painted river overflowed, flooding the gallery? Or a sudden gust of wind swept through, touching the viewers? And what if they realized what she could do? She pushed the thought aside, taking a deep breath as she splashed water on her face. She needed to focus on the gallery, on today. No distractions. She'd been careful all week. Still, the memory of being transported to the park unnerved her. Nothing that extreme had happened since, but the occasional ripple of water or a bird nearly lifting off the canvas was enough to make her uneasy. After getting dressed, she made a quick breakfast. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a text from her best friend, Rosalie. Good luck, Ella, and relax. You've got this. See you tomorrow at the show. Ella smiled at the words, even though her stomach was in knots. She typed back, "Thanks. I'll see you tomorrow." Her phone buzzed again almost immediately. This time, the gallery curator. Just a reminder, the final walkthrough is scheduled for 11 a.m. Bring any additional pieces you'd like to include in the collection. The gallery is confident your work will be a hit. Ella inhaled and exhaled slowly. Everything would be fine. She grabbed the two paintings, the one of Pittsburgh reflected in the Monongahela, and another tucked behind it, along with her purse and keys. By the time she arrived at the gallery, her nerves had settled into quiet determination. The venue was stylish and contemporary, with high ceilings and whitewashed walls, perfect for showcasing her work. A gallery handler took the paintings she'd brought, placing them in their designated room, while a marketing assistant guided her through the maze of exhibits. Each piece displayed exactly as she had envisioned. She moved through the gallery, carefully inspecting each painting, occasionally adjusting placements to perfect the flow. Her twilight scene of Pittsburgh's skyline sat front and center, positioned so the lighting captured every reflective detail in the water. But as she stared at the shimmering river, a familiar pull stirred in her chest. No, not now. Not here. She forced herself to look away, focusing on the next piece. A series of landscapes inspired by the city's parks. Under the gallery lights, the colors felt more vibrant, almost alive, as if one could stride in, But as she neared a painting of a dense, forested path, the pull returned, subtle yet unsettling. Her hand trembled as she reached for the wall to steady herself. She couldn't risk it. Not here. Not today. Why was this starting again? Was it because she was tense and anxious, trying to suppress the sensation? She shifted her focus to the gallery curator and marketing assistant, who had been quietly observing her. Forcing a smile, she said, "Everything looks great. I think we're all set for tomorrow. Fantastic. Everything will be perfect. We just need you to review the virtual gallery site and give your approval," the curator said cheerfully. Ella nodded, her thoughts swirling. Tomorrow would be okay. She just had to keep her focus. If she could get through today without any mishaps, then tomorrow, the grand opening, she would be able to maintain control. She just had to make sure nothing came to life from her paintings or whisked anyone away. The next day arrived in a flash. Her art exhibition was set to begin at 1 p.m., and she needed to be at the gallery by 11 a.m. to handle any last-minute details, do a final walkthrough, and prepare for the guests. Last night, after returning home to unwind, she had felt the urge to draw, but she forced herself not to. She needed to rest, to stay focused. She didn't want to tempt the growing power within her. By the time Ella stepped into the gallery, the air was rich with the scent of fresh flowers, the sweetness of wine, and the faint trace of new paint. The space had transformed overnight. Elegant spotlights bathed each painting in a soft glow, making the artwork seem even more alive. Small, stylish benches were arranged throughout the room, inviting visitors to linger. Soon, guests began to arrive, mingling with glasses of wine in hand, their murmurs forming a low hum of anticipation. Ella smoothed her dress, a beautiful wrap dress with bell sleeves, the fabric printed with an abstract design from one of her early paintings. Her friend Rosalie had helped bring it to life, sewing it into a wearable piece of art. Ella's hands trembled slightly as she scanned the room, watching how people responded to her work. Rosalie was the first to spot her, letting out an excited squeal as she rushed over. "You did it, Ella. Look at all these people. And your work. It's absolutely breathtaking under these lights. You've been busy over the years. Just look at all these paintings." She squeezed Ella's arms, beaming. "How are you feeling?" Ella forced a smile, letting out a nervous chuckle. "Excited, nervous, and definitely a little terrified." Rosalie laughed reassuringly. "Totally normal. Just breathe, okay? This is the moment you've been waiting for. And it's happening." Before Ella could respond, a voice cut through their conversation. "Ella Larson." She turned to see a distinguished older man with long salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes behind wire-framed glasses. He extended a hand. "Hello, I'm George Morgan, art critic for the Tribune. I must say, your work is astonishing. There's a vibrancy and realism here that I rarely see in paintings these days. Ella's heart pounded against her ribs. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. That means a lot. She smiled, trying to keep her nerves in check. His gaze lingered on the twilight of Pittsburgh painting. This one in particular. It's mesmerizing. It almost feels as though the water is truly moving. How did you achieve such a remarkable effect? Ella swallowed hard. Oh, I tend to get in a zone, she said with a small, nervous smile. A lot of detail, layering, and finding the right mix of paint. Morgan nodded approvingly. Enchanting, almost lifelike. As the critic moved on, Rosalie elbowed Ella subtly. See? You're already impressing the media. Ella barely had time to absorb the moment before Dina, the gallery owner, approached with an eager expression. Ella, would you mind coming with me? The guests would love to hear a few words from you. Some are already interested in purchasing your work. Just a short welcome and a bit about your inspiration, okay? Ella's stomach clenched, but she nodded. This was part of the dream, right? Taking a deep breath, she followed Dina to a small platform at the center of the room. As the soft clinking of glasses faded and guests turned to face her, Dina introduced her. Ella steadied herself and took a deep breath. Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Larson, but most people call me Ella. First, I want to thank Dina, the gallery owner, and Jessie, the curator, for giving my art the honor of being the first exhibit in this beautiful new space. And of course, thank you all for being here tonight. She continued her speech, her voice growing steadier with each word. When she finished, a soft round of applause filled the room. Ella exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her. But just as she stepped down, a ripple of movement caught her eye. The twilight river. The light against the canvas shimmered. The water within the painting trembled, as if stirred by a real breeze. Ella's breath hitched. No, not now. Please, not now. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to focus, willing the movement to stop. Every ounce of concentration was poured into holding it still. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, grounding herself. Slowly, the movement faded. The river stilled. She exhaled, relief washing over her as she forced a smile, just as a guest approached with a compliment. Hold it together. Just a few more hours. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her abilities weren't just growing stronger. They were tied to her emotions. And she was losing control. Across the room, a guest murmured in disbelief. I could have sworn the cat's tail just wagged. Another gasp followed. Did that bird just fly to the other side of the canvas? Ella's stomach twisted. She needed to master her abilities fast. Henry, was average in almost every measure of the word. He worked in a company that, like himself, was totally and completely ordinary. Nothing he did on a day-to-day basis mattered. And that was just the way he liked. All that changed, however, when he showed up to his office one day. He'd been there for a few hours at this point, mindlessly typing away at his keyboard, when a thought occurred to him. Why had it been so quiet? Now, usually, he was the first one to the office and quickly settled into his desk. He would close the door and get lost in a sea of numbers and words. Still, though, Henry would always hear some chatter from behind his door. Maybe the beep of the copier or the laugh of a joke. Never had it been utterly silent like this. Henry tried to get out of his mind. He tried to continue with his work. Henry continued typing. Usually, his work soothed Henry. But now, a growing sense of uneasiness filled him. Somehow, he knew that if he stopped working and dared to open his office door, everything he loved about his life would come to an end suddenly and horrifically. Henry continued typing. Henry knew that he couldn't keep mindlessly typing at his keyboard. So, he decided to get up and investigate what was happening. Henry continued typing. It appeared that Henry didn't want to follow the laid-out structure of the story. Perhaps he thought that if he kept typing and doing his work, all this wouldn't be happening. Ah, that's the spirit, Henry. Bravo. You figured it out. Well done. But seriously, don't you think it's time to face the inevitable and open the door? Henry continued typing. All right, you win, Henry. I'll leave you alone now and let you live out the rest of your life in ignorant bliss. Goodbye, Henry. Henry paused and stood up. He walked over to his door and opened it slowly. Henry couldn't pretend to keep working any longer. He walked over to his door and tossed the door open, as if to say, I don't fear the situation I am currently in. In fact, I am Henry, and I laugh in the face of danger. The door slammed against the wall and revealed an empty office. The brave protagonist decided to get to the bottom of this. Henry walked carefully out of his office. Then, he walked down a hallway and stopped at a set of stairs. The left set went up, and the right set went down. Upon coming to a set of stairs, Henry took the one on his left. Henry paused for a moment before heading down the right set of stairs. For some reason, beyond all common sense, Henry decided to take the stairs on the right. He surely knew that there was nothing at the bottom of those as he descended each step. After all, he'd been an employee at the company for, I don't honestly know how long. My, how embarrassing. Well, let's say longer than a year and less than 100 years. Yes, I'm quite happy we've come to an agreement. Henry reached the bottom of the stairs. He looked around and saw nothing there except for a bucket. He walked over and picked up the bucket, then headed back up the stairs. Ah, yes, the bucket. Quite a crucial piece of the story. I'm glad you spent all that time walking to the bottom of the stairs for a bucket. Henry made his way to the original fork in the stairs and went up this time. An eerie feeling began to creep into Henry. He hoped that maybe he had just missed a memo and everyone was in an early morning meeting. They were rare, but did happen from time to time. Once he reached the top of the stairs, he walked through an open door and into the meeting room. Henry clutched at the bucket dearly. The bucket was a soothing presence for Henry and comforted him. He needed every bit of comfort he could manage because the meeting room was completely empty. Not a sign of life except for half a box of donuts from the day before. Henry quickly walked through the room and into the hallway. After a short while, he came to 3 closed doors. On the left was a red door. In the middle was a purple door. On the right was a green door with a sign on the front that read, "Do not enter unless you wish to be fired." Henry knew he should enter the door on the right because that was his boss's office. If someone knew what was happening, it would be his boss. He would have to risk the chance of being fired. Henry walked over to the red door and turned the handle. He pulled on the door. It rattled, but didn't open. Without a second doubt, Henry knew he should go his boss's office. So he entered the door on his right, the green door. Henry walked over to the purple door and turned the handle, then pulled on the door. It rattled, but didn't open. Ahem. Perhaps I wasn't clear. Henry walked over to the green door and walked inside his boss's office. Does nobody have respect for a good story anymore? It's a good thing I remembered to lock those doors. Henry opened the green door and walked inside. When Henry walked inside his boss's office, to no one's surprise, it was empty. There was nothing but a solid wood desk and huge bookcases on each side. At that moment, Henry resigned himself to a life of solitude. He was sure that he was going to spend the rest of his miserable life in complete and utter isolation. And he was okay with that. Come to think of it, he never really liked having his co-workers around, did he? Sure, he didn't hate the small talk or the company meetings, but he was certain he could come to terms with being without. It may even allow him to focus more completely on his work. Then, a horrible thought crossed his mind. How would he work if there was no one to send his completed documents to? Truly a tough one. That's it. Henry will be the worker and the boss. Yes, that's genius. This way, he can continue to play out his mundane life and find some semblance of happiness. Well, I guess that's it then. Henry spent the rest of his time working away at his desk, while occasionally walking up the stairs and approving all his glorious work. Henry really was a superb and hard-working employee. Henry still stood in his boss's office. He stared at a big red button that said, "Do not touch," in big letters. He walked over to it and pressed it. Oh, Henry, what did you think would happen when you pressed the button? Setting aside the obvious fact that it was clearly stated for you not to touch, did you think that by pressing the button you could fight against the system? Fight against your fate? Fight against me? Ha ha ha. I applaud your resilience, Henry. Truly. Henry pressed the button again. Okay. This is starting to get pathetic now, Henry. How about you just head back to your office, and we'll go with the ending I already planned out for you. I know you, Henry. I know that you need someone to tell you what to do, and that without that, you can't function. So, I am telling you now, Henry, to turn around and go to your office and get back to work. Henry pressed the button again. The building shook, and Henry had to brace himself to avoid falling over. Henry, why did you do that? Didn't I just give you a direct order? If you press that button again, Henry pressed the button again. The building shook more violently this time. It shook until Henry felt like he might pass out. Then it all stopped at once. Henry waited, bucket firmly in hand, for a long time in that office. Henry waited until he felt like it was long enough. Finally, there was no one telling him what he should think or how he should act. It was a freeing sensation, but also a deeply disturbing one. Perhaps he would have been better off blindly listening to that voice, but it was too late to second-guess himself now. So, he turned around and headed back to his office. Henry looked down at his watch. Almost time for lunch. Finding Lucas. "He's in there. I know he is," said Mark to no one, kneeling behind a tree and staring through binoculars. He started to count. 3, 4, 5. I can take 5. This was only the people he could see, and he couldn't be sure that there weren't more. He'd have to wait another hour, then go in under the guise of darkness, or risk being caught. An hour was a long time to wait, when all you want is to be reunited. But if he wasn't smart about this, he'd die before he could ever help Lucas. 3 days earlier, Mark and his 6-year-old son, Lucas, were eating cans of beans by a fire in the desolate woods. They assumed they were all alone. And why wouldn't they? When you're living through a zombie apocalypse, you're almost always alone. Mark had been recounting tales about the boy's mother from before he was born. This only saddened Lucas, since he never got to meet her. She died giving birth to him, back when modern medicine wasn't hard to come by, and before the day of darkness, the name the survivors dubbed for the start of the apocalypse. Survivors was a funny word to both of them. since they hadn't seen a single other human in the past 6 months. The last human they saw met his end at the hands of Mark and his trusty 8-inch blade he kept strapped to his ankle. The red-headed drunk had stumbled upon the two of them while they were pillaging an already slim, rationed convenience store. Seemingly friendly at first, he approached them with a good-natured spirit. It turned dark very quickly when he elbowed Mark in the face, picked up Lucas, and made a run for it. Carrying a 6-year-old boy slowed you down mightily, and Mark caught up to him rather quickly. In the old days, Mark would have just tackled him to the ground and called the authorities. But that was the old days. Now, the only justice was the one you served up yourself. Mark stuck his blade directly between the drunk's shoulder blades, and he went down hard, splitting his head open against the pavement, choking on his own blood in the process. He had fallen on top of Lucas, but luckily, the boy had not sustained any injuries. No physical ones, that is. The trauma, on the other hand, back in the old world, children were just that. Someone's product of love. In the new world, after the day of darkness, children became a commodity. This was because the disease that had infected humans and made them turn into the creatures we so eloquently refer to as zombies affected 99.99% of children. Studies showed, this was when there were still studies to be had, that it only affected about 96% of citizens above the age of 15. This made children a delicacy, a chance to repopulate the world, one human at a time. A modern-day Adam or Eve. 4% of the world's population went unaffected, except for the after effects. After the day of darkness, everyone resorted to killing each other to preserve any food or shelter that still remained. For all Mark knew, he and Lucas were the only two people remaining on Earth. That's what he thought. Until 3 nights ago. Are we going to see Mommy in heaven when we get there? Lucas asked innocently. Yeah, buddy, Mark said glumly. We sure are. She's waiting for us. I wish she didn't have to be there. I wish she was here with us right now. Me too, pal. Me too. They sat in silence, listening only to the crickets singing their nightly ballad and the sound of the spoons scraping against the bottom of the cans of beans. But then, crack. A twig snapped. Mark's ears perked up, but then the silence continued. He glanced around, and all he could see was darkness. His eyes stopped on his boy, his sweet, innocent boy, who didn't deserve this life. He deserved to be a normal kid, to grow up with parents who loved him, in a house with a swing set and video games on the TV. Instead, they were always on the run, preserving their lives. A tear formed in his eye as he stared, watching that wonderful boy spoon a mouthful of beans into his mouth. His son made eye contact and gave a smile, but then his face instantly turned to a look of terror. Mark noticed movement in the bushes behind Lucas and assumed Lucas's terror was brought upon by noticing movement behind Mark. Before he could turn around to see, Mark was knocked out cold. He wasn't out for long, maybe a minute or two, and when he came to the group of pillagers were leaving, they had the boy hog-tied, and two burly men carried him like he was a pig on a stake. Mark went to jump up, but a knee met his back. At least he thought it was a knee. Instant pain struck him. He turned over to see the man's face, and that's when his world started to blur. He had a small knife protruding from his side. "The boy's ours, motherfucker," said the gangly man who was missing 2 teeth. "Go to the clearing now." Mark passed out. That had been 3 days ago. He had spent the last 3 days trying to follow the tracks of the group who had taken his son. He was slow-paced, having limited flexibility and immense pain from the gash in his back. The knife missed any major arteries or nerves, and mostly just caught the fat muscles. Still, the pain was excruciating. But Mark knew if he let too much time pass, the trail would run cold, and he'd lose it forever. Along with his boy, the tracks had led him to a small town. He found a tree to hide behind while he could scope it out. In his satchel, which he was fortunate enough to still have, he always stored his gear 50 or so yards away from his campsite, just in case. He had a pair of binoculars, which he took out and used to get a better view of the town. He knew he'd have to wait another hour or so until darkness fell, but he only saw 5 people, and he thought under the darkness of night he could take 5 people out. He would be reunited with his son soon enough. Night came, and he readied himself. He carried a long machete, which was stained brownish red, having been used on one too many people since the day of darkness. Too many people that Mark hated to admit. He slowly approached the town from the south side, where he saw only one guard. This would be the most crucial. They had firearms on them, and he knew if he could take down the first guard quietly, he'd have a firearm of his own if needed. He waited patiently as the guard did their stroll backwards and forwards. Once he knew the pattern, he took a deep breath and waited for his opportunity. After he heard 3 steps, he knew the guard would turn, and that's when he would pounce. 1, he thought about his wife. 2, he thought about Lucas, scared and alone. 3, he knew it was time to pounce. Mark jumped out from behind the wall, and the guard turned around instantly. The guard went to scream, but Mark brought the machete down rapidly into his neck, spraying a fresh coat of blood all over Mark's face. The guard went down without a minimal thud. Mark picked up the AR-15 rifle and slung it over his shoulder. He was just getting started. Taking down the next two was easier than he anticipated. When someone had a gun and they were standing guard, you'd assume they were a trained soldier. Sometimes, even Mark forgot that they were living in this desolate world. And these were just normal people who had normal jobs and normal lives before the world went to shit. He himself had been a CPA, and now he'd branded himself a modern-day Rambo. The world had changed, and everyone had to adjust. These two guards, one man and one woman, didn't even realize he was there until it was too late. He had grabbed the woman's mouth from behind while swinging the machete upwards towards the man, slicing from the bottom of his protruding gut right up to his chin, killing him instantly when it sliced his jugular. The woman fought, but Mark snapped her neck, killing her instantly too. 3 down and 2 to go. He had to find Lucas. Slowly, he tiptoed around the town, looking into empty house windows and around corners, until he finally saw a fire pit with 3 people sitting around it. They were enjoying dinner and joking and laughing. He recognized 2 of them immediately. The 2 bigger ones were the 2 who carried Lucas away. They had Lucas somewhere, and he intended to find out where. He approached them from behind. AR-15 raised at the biggest of the 3, set in his sights. He got as close as he dared before making his grand entrance. As soon as he stopped, he shot the tall guard sitting on the left of the fire straight through the head. The other 2 were startled. "Don't fucking move!" Mark shouted. They didn't. Both men raised their hands, but didn't dare turn around to face their attacker. Mark flanked them on the left, rifle raised, and aimed at them until they were in eyesight. "Where's my son?" the third man said. "Mister, I don't know what." Mark shot him in the forehead, and his body collapsed with a thud. The remaining man, the second guard, perked up stolidly, trying not to show any fear or weakness. "Where is he?" Mark said, anger trembling in his voice. His finger was pressed on the trigger with enough force that at any second the bullet could discharge. But he stood firm. "Where?" The man picked up a piece of meat from his place and took a bite. He smiled at Mark, then said, "This was his leg. It's delicious." Mark instantly felt numb. They had cooked and ate his son. This is what the world had come to. No, he couldn't believe it. The man was just trying to mess with him. And then the man started to laugh, slightly at first, then harder and more wildly. "No!" Mark said, and pulled the trigger. The man's top half of his head was ripped off, and he fell backwards, Mark approached and stood over his body, then emptied the clip bullet by bullet into the man's chest. He was sobbing as he did it, and continued to pull the trigger until he heard that fateful click, click, click of an empty chamber. He fell to his knees, and that's when he felt the pang of steel press against the back of his head. The man who stabbed him, the gangly man with 2 teeth missing, was pressing a pistol against the back of his head. Well, looky here. Back from the dead, I see. And from the looks of it, you're angry and taking your vengeance. The man looked around at all his dead friends. That wasn't very nice. Now was it? You killed my son, cooked him, and ate him, Mark pleaded through tears. And I'm supposed to be nice? He was breathing heavily, angry and full of adrenaline. 8 I am? Boy, we ain't cannibals here. Mark got a spark of hope, reached stealthily into his ankle holder, and pulled out the 8-inch knife he kept there. When he could tell the man was distracted, looking at his dead friends, Mark dove right, swinging his left arm up to hit the man's arm and knock the gun away. At the same time, he came across with his right hand, slicing at the man's legs, instantly causing the man to go down shrieking in pain. Mark jumped on his back, wrestled him fully to the ground, and grabbed a tuft of his hair. He yanked back and pressed his blade against the man's neck. "Your man just admitted to it," he screamed. "He was trying to get under your skin," the man pleaded. "Please, I'll tell you where he is. Just don't kill me. Please." Mark pressed the knife harder against the skin, and the man could feel the cold steel pierce the thin skin in his neck. "You have 10 seconds, Mark said. "How do I know you ain't just gonna kill me after I tell you?" the man asked. "You have my word. Tell me where he is, and I'll let you go." 6, 5, 4, okay. About a mile south of here, there's a village, a bigger village. They have goods that we never had access to. We traded him this morning for food and booze. It includes that whole pig you saw my man eating over there. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Mark asked, pressing the blade slightly harder. "My pocket," the man choked. "There's a written bill of sale in my pocket." Mark loosened his grip, and the man let in a deep gasp of air. "It includes 2 more restocks of supplies over the next 3 months. Your boy was worth a hell of a lot to a village looking to build the world over again." He heaved, trying to catch his breath, and coughed. Mark reached into the man's pocket and grabbed the paper. He was telling the truth. "How many people in the village?" Mark asked. "I don't know. 20, 25 maybe." Mark had what he needed. "Take the paper and use it to barter for your—" Mark slit the man's throat before he could finish. Blood oozed from his throat at a rate Mark had never seen. The man went limp, and Mark stood up. He spit on the man's back. "Go to the clearing," he said, then kicked the man's lifeless body. Lucas was alive, still lost, but alive as far as he knew. He was in a village a mile away, with 25 people guarding it. He'd need weapons. He'd need rest. He'd need courage. Mark gathered up all the weapons and ammo he could find in the town and brought them into one house. He cleaned everything, loaded everything, and made his plan. He'd sleep, heal, and rest. Then tomorrow, he'd get his son. One way or another, he'd get his son.